Weber, director of FRC's Center for Religious Liberty, talked about the information on Washington Watch.
There are all restrictions in how we understand religious freedom, meaning the freedom to choose your faith and live out that faith, and that includes the right to change your faith. So these are very problematic.
Apostasy is an act of refusing to continue to follow, obey, or recognize a religious faith. Blasphemy laws say you cannot insult religion. Anti-conversion laws prevent someone from converting or leading another individual to a different religion or faith practice.
These are numbers that show a significant portion of the world's population living under regimes which do not respect religious freedom. Folks can find this report at frc.org/ABA laws. And please, we encourage folks to go to the website, download the report, read the report, because it's pretty extensive and is a lot more than we can cover right here. We've got nearly 50 pages of material, and we want people to read about these situations around the world and the people they affect.
I'm Chris Woodward.
A pro-life organization is keeping a watch on a Michigan abortion clinic, suspecting there may be a problem with botched abortions.
Operation Rescue has obtained 911 records of a call for help from March 22nd at Northland Family Planning, which was heavily redacted to protect the patient's identity. Here's the call.
Southfield 911, where's your emergency?
Hi, I'm calling from Northland Family Planning, and I actually need an ambulance here.
Okay, what's going on there, ma'am?
We have a patient here that was in the middle of a DNA procedure, and she is having very heavy bleeding.
Okay, and how old is she?
She is 27 years old.
27?
Yes.
Okay, is she conscious right now?
She's conscious right now, yes.
Okay, we're going to get someone on the way there, ma'am.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, bye.
The woman was rushed to Providence Hospital, where the abortion of the twins was completed and the bleeding stopped. She had lost 17% of her total blood volume before the ambulance arrived, and shock usually begins when blood loss is at about 20%. There have been 5 ambulance calls for emergency transportation to hospitals from Northland in the last several months, and Operation Rescue wants the public to know of the abortuary's track record. I'm Charlie Butts.
A Virginia-based legal group is asking the U.S. Supreme Court to end what it says has become an abuse of eminent domain by companies that build natural gas pipelines. A lawyer for the Institute for Justice says courts are increasingly allowing pipeline companies to defer payments to landowners whose property is condemned. American Family News is online at onenewsnow.com. I'm Rusty Pugh.
Doc, I've been feeling a little out of sorts lately. Can you help?
Well, let's try a few questions. What do you think of when I say the word Roku?
Oh, my wife and I used to love that dance when we were younger.
Yes, I'd say you're a little out of touch.
What do you recommend?
I recommend you listen to AFR.
American Family Radio. Available on Apple and Android products, Amazon Alexa, and now available on Roku.
And then we'd whip, and then we'd nay-nay. Oh, it was wonderful.
She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
You have to understand, in Venezuela, gun ownership is not something that is open to everybody. So if the military have the guns, they have the power. And as long as Nicolas Maduro controls the military, he controls the country.
Joe Biden was there he was there for the time that the Chinese built the stationary islands in the South China Sea, which are essentially aircraft carriers. They put military radars on it, put military combat planes on them. And so Joe Biden's got a lot to answer for.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Welcome to the program. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are slamming and jamming, lots to talk about, lots and lots of news and information for you. I want to point to our first guest of the show. We're going to be speaking with Carmine Sabia. He's a political and cultural commentator, frequent guest in the program, and he's going to come on and talk to us about Facebook banning a number of individuals who are on the right side of the political spectrum. They may or may not be people that you agree with politically or in any way viewpoint, but they're famous names, and there's quite a list of them. They've just recently been booted off of Facebook. One of these individuals is Louis Farrakhan, and he's been grouped in with what they call right-wing people who've been banned from Facebook. Now, you might be thinking, well, you know, Louis Farrakhan is a purveyor of really horrible content, and he is. He's anti-Semitic. He he's quite the piece of worked goods, but he has, on a freedom of speech type thing, the right to put his views out there, right? And if he's not going to be allowed to put his views out there, where everyone else is, and people on the left who put out fringe type views, the Antifa groups, they're still there. They're not being banned. If some people get to have free speech and other people don't because their speech is offensive, then we have a violation of the First Amendment. And we're talking about speech that we don't like. I hate Farrakhan's speech. I hate the things that he says. But we're in America. So if I'm offended by his speech, if I feel he's lying, he's not telling the truth, I don't have the right to shut him down on a neutral public platform. You can complain about what he's saying, but you can't just say he doesn't deserve to be there. Free speech is only for, for me and not for thee. So we'll have a conversation with Carmine about that. Interesting that he's being characterized as someone who's on the right. Notice how they do that. Like when the stuff broke off and actually, this has happened so many times, we don't have any one singular example, but remember when Governor Northam came out with his comments and his blackface and all that, and he was at the top of the news for his abortion, infanticide, justifying comments, and then they found the blackface photos. Well, CNN originally characterized him as a far-right, in other words, a Republican governor. And then they went on to correct it, but after everyone had already seen it. So in other words, they painted him as someone on the right. So there are people around the country here in America who saw that on CNN who believe that Governor Northam is a Republican. He's not. He's not anywhere near close to a Republican, but that is what they do. So the idea that Louis Farrakhan is somehow on the right, I mean, he would laugh at that. He would have one of his fiery speeches from his Islamic pulpit over that. But that's what they're saying about him. So here we are now. I want to get into this comment by Joe Biden. Now that he's a viable candidate, which I have something I want to point out about him after we listen to this audio. He's now starting to lay out his ideas about different things. What does he believe on this? What does he believe on that? Now, this is super, super important for us to kind of unpack because he's going to start to lay these things out and try to rewrite history just a little bit. He's got the Obama years that he has to kind of work his way through. And it's not going to be easy for him because the Obama years were not successful. Foreign policy wise, it was a disaster. So now he's got to kind of lay out his own incoming doctrine, if you will, because he hopes to be the president of the United States. So the first thing he wants to do is decouple any kind of fear that Americans have that China is a rising power, that it's a threat to our hegemony around the world, and that it has interests in supplanting us as the world's primary superpower. He's got to get all of that out of the way because over the coming months, as some reporters do true investigative journalism, and as some, probably mostly on the right, will begin to really delve into his policy positions and his familial connections to foreign powers, we're going to see some troubling connections to China, to Russia, to some of the satellite Eastern European states that were parts of communist Russia. We're going to see some problematic relationships. He doesn't want that. He doesn't want people to draw those connections between who he was then and who he is now, because he's just looking to be your crazy Uncle Joe, only from the White House this time instead of from Blair House. So he's got to start off with China. And it's brilliant strategy on his part, but the internet is forever. Some Americans will be wowed by this stuff. But I want you to listen to the way he's going to basically paper over any of the truths that we know about China. He acts as if it doesn't exist. It's number 4.
The fact of the matter is we can do all we need to do without punishing anybody. Anybody. The reason I'm optimistic here is look at who we are. I've met virtually every major world leader in my role as vice president and as foreign relations chairman over the last 30 years. And that's not hyperbole. Virtually every one. I don't know a single solitary one who would not change places with the problems the President of the United States has versus the problems they have. China is going to eat our lunch? Come on, man. They can't even figure out how to deal with the fact that they have this great division between the China Sea and the mountains in the east, in the west. they can't figure out how they're going to deal with the corruption that exists within the system. I mean, they're not bad folks, but guess what? They're not a competition for us.
So is that the truth? Is China really not competition for us? Is this something that we're just kind of making up and we should, stop? Is it something that if we look at what China's doing, he's telling the truth and the rest of us are just fear mongering, if you will? Well, let me give you some information. And this is current up to the minute stuff, vetted by one of the employees, one of the staffers for a sitting senator. So we've got China's goal. What is China's goal in the world right now? They want to replace the U.S. as the world's leading superpower. And that's according to FBI Director Christopher Wray. He said that in December. FBI Director Wray also told lawmakers in January, because it's his job to brief lawmakers on what different world powers are doing in the foreign policy arena. He said the Chinese counterintelligence threat is more deep, more diverse, more vexing, more challenging, and more comprehensive, more concerning than any other counterintelligence threat I can think of. So that means it's a bigger deal than Russia, the magic elixir for Democrats. Just say the word Russia and watch them melt into a puddle of sweet nectar, or, become soft and pliable and able to hear and understand everything that you're saying. Russia, Russia, Russia. It's just something they can't let go of. China represents our greatest long-term strategic threat to a free and open Indo-Pacific and to the United States. That's Admiral Philip Davidson speaking in testimony before the Senate Armed Services Committee in February. I'm running down these quotes for you because instead of me just giving you the raw data from a security studies group or someplace like that, what I'd prefer is these quotes from sitting leaders and experts out in the operational theater speaking about China. And so these are different testimonies that they've given outside of knowledge of each other. So it's not like they coordinated. This isn't a talking points list. This is quotes from our leadership about China. Now, remember, Joe Biden was the vice president of the United States. That means he held a top secret SCI Yankee White security clearance. And Yankee White denotes it's basically the highest you can go unless you're the president of the United States. And the president has a clearance that, I'm not even sure if we know what it's called, but it's everything. Yankee White is the step below that. That's a security clearance he held. I don't know if he went to any briefings or read any of the beautiful binders that people drop by the office, but he clearly wants you to think that the China issue is not a big deal. Yet here are our experts saying, oh, it's a big deal. Here's another one. This is one of the documents over at dni.gov. China remains the most active strategic competitor responsible for cyber espionage against the U.S. government, corporations, and allies. Here's Dan Coates, intelligence chief, DNI. China had a remarkable rise in capabilities that are stunning, a significant amount of what was achieved through stealing information of our companies. Defense News has a quote. Shanahan, whose message to staff on his first day as acting secretary was China, China, China. He warns of China's growing nuclear capabilities, its interest in space-based systems, and its investments in the military over the last decade. The same time period in which we had the bower-in-chief, Mr. I bow to everyone and show the top of my head to everyone, even though I run a country that's never been subjugated militarily. And while he was decreasing our military effectiveness and defunding updates and repairs to our fleets and all of our military hardware, China's ramping up. And I have people who have reached out to me when I've reported on this before, very upset with me, saying that I'm fear-mongering and our military is the tip of the spear and it's the best and yada, yada, yada. I'm an Air Force veteran, fourth-generation military veteran. I'm decorated. My father's decorated. This isn't a game to me. And I don't say things about the superiority that China is trying to achieve at our expense lightly. It's something that I wish I didn't have to say. I wish it was true that Barack Obama was strong on military defense and that he wasn't a weasel in chief and that he had done a good job taking care of our military and making sure that they were staffed, funded, and militarily, that all of the hardware was updated, that everything was operational, that he had that as a priority more than his obsession with gay marriage and transgender rights and all of that stuff, and these social experiments that he tried to foist onto our active duty service members. But that's not what happened. So this is one of the most important things that we can do, as a radio person disseminating information. I want you to be informed. I want you to know that you know that you know, and you can verify it. You can Google it for yourself. You can go to some of these military blogs, go to starsandstripes.com. I mean, there's a whole list of places you can go and read up on our military effectiveness and whether or not we have what we need to make war. And more often, I'm reading articles on different websites about how different capabilities that we used to be so far advanced and so far ahead of everyone else were no longer advanced. Or that our military members during the Obama administration, I reported on this many, many times, our military members were actually going and finding old planes that were defunct and cannibalizing the equipment off of them because they couldn't get new equipment to repair our fighter jets. And that was just the Air Force. The Navy was doing the same thing. Now, it's one thing if you're missing something tiny like a screw, pardon me, and the requisition isn't going to get it there for a couple of weeks and you want to put a plane in the sky. And so it's something, utilitarian that you're cannibalizing. But a lot of this stuff, you can't go back and cannibalize it from an older plane because the technology is such that the older plane can't give you what you need. So you got crew chiefs out there, literally planes they can't put in the sky because they don't have the stuff they need. And I remember working on the flight line. Our office was on the flight line, and I was, a pencil pusher, painted nails, perfectly pressed BDUs, shiny boots. But when I would go into the aircraft hangar and the crew chiefs would show me the weapon system that I was reporting on, they were very, very clear about whether or not they could get parts for something, whether or not the new parts that they were getting were functioning as well as the old parts, whether changes in the way that the parts that they were receiving were crafted were having an impact on the operational capability of that weapon system. And the weapon system at the first part of my career, it was the F-16. That was I did all the data on that, whether it was ready or not. How many of them could be in the air, any place on the planet in 18 minutes? How many of the fleet that I was responsible for were hard broken, meaning they'd been broken for a while and they were repairing it and it still wasn't going up? And how many of them were ready to rumble, ready to go up and do battle? This is an important, our military exists to maintain air, space, sea, land superiority. That's what it's there for. It's not there for social experimentation. And so coming off of the Obama years, and even with the influx of cash that's been spent by our current president, we still have a long way to go to make sure we're ready to do battle against an adversary like China. And it's ridiculous that Joe Biden would even suggest that that's not the situation. But he wants to be president. Ridiculous. All right, when we get back, we'll have Carmine Sabia. Stay right there.
Here's Walker Wildman for Redeem Clean Laundry Products.
Not only do you get a great product and you get to obviously clean your clothes, get the stains out and use the multi-surface cleaner to clean your countertops and use the dryer sheets. You're doing all of this and the money's going to support the work of American Family Association.
Redeem Clean Laundry Products were developed by AFA supporters Lynn Ingram and Jim Duncan to assist in funding the mission of the American Family Association. Redeem Clean products work as well as or better than other products on the market. They're environmentally safe, biodegradable, and they're made right here in the United States.
The great thing about Redeem Clean is not only is the product great, but it goes to support a great cause, and that is the work of American Family Association.
For clean laundry and a cleaner society, it's Redeem Clean. Visit redeemclean.afastore.net.
Hi, I'm Crawford Loritz with a legacy moment. There's one who stands between the dead and the living. In the movie Armageddon, Bruce Willis plays the role of a rough-and-tumble oil well driller. He and his ragtag crew are enlisted by our government to go into space and drill a hole in a meteor that's headed for the Earth. The problem is, if they don't succeed, planet Earth will be destroyed. Well, they run into a major snag, and in order for them to accomplish the task, Willis's character makes the ultimate decision. That's right. He sacrifices his life in order to save the world. Even Hollywood sometimes stumbles onto the concept of sacrificial substitution. The other day I was reading Numbers chapter 16. The children of Israel grumbled and complained against God, and in so doing, that brought the wrath of God, the judgment of God on them. There was a plague, and people were dying by the thousands. Numbers chapter 16, verses 48 and 49 says, "And he," meaning Aaron, "took his stand between the dead and the living, so that the plague was checked. But those who died by the plague were 14,700, besides those who died on account of Korah. Then Aaron returned to Moses at the doorway of the tent of meeting, for the plague had been stopped." What a powerful portrayal of what Jesus Christ has done on the cross for us. There in time and space, God checked the plague of sin. Calvary stopped the plague of sin. It's in your hands. If you will turn to the Savior, he will change your direction. You don't have to die. There is provision for you. Here's what I want you to remember and do today. You do not have to die in your sin. God has made a way for you to live. Turn from your sin. Give your life to him today.
More information about the ministry of Crawford Loritz can be found online at livingalegacy.org.
You can watch a live stream of the show on Facebook or YouTube at Stacy on the Right. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. Thank you so much for being with us today. We are really blessed and awesomely, we're having a good time here. So happy to have our next guest join us. We have Carmine Sabia. He is a political and cultural commentator. What website should I give out, Carmine? Welcome to the show.
The Federalistpapers.org.
Federalistpapers.org. He's the editor there. Okay. So I go by what Demetrius puts in the things. You gotta hit your friend up and let him know he's not putting that in the descriptor there for us to share on the show. So Carmine, one of the things I saw on your Twitter feed today was this. It's kind of weird because in some ways a lot of Americans are like, oh, finally they've got some sense. You see Facebook censoring some voices. Some of the voices are on the right side of the political spectrum, and some of them, like Louis Farrakhan, he's never been a Republican or anything like that, yet that's the characterization that's being put on him. What's your take on all of this?
First of all, hilarious that they're calling Louis Farrakhan a far-right extremist. I think Maxine Waters would take exception to that. But I tell you, Stacy, and I said this to somebody who was on my page, they said, look, these people still have freedom of speech. And my argument is Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, WhatsApp, or whatever they call that, Snapchat, whatever these kids got today, that's the new public square. And so if you don't have free speech on those platforms, you're essentially silent. You essentially don't have free speech. And I think when a tech company has gotten to the point where they can decide whose ideas can be heard and whose cannot, I'm not a fan of government regulation, but you're in that area where it looks like, we might need some government regulation here.
Okay, so Carmine, I remember going on, it's a really popular radio show in D.C., and the host is a dyed-in-the-wool Republican, older gentleman, so he's been on the radio a long time. And he and I got into a dust-up over this because I said something similar. I said, we need regulation because Facebook and, Twitter, they're so ubiquitous now for news that if you can't be on those because you have unpopular opinions, it means that you've been effectively silenced and your rights have been taken away. And he said, well, you're a radio host, right? So you want regulation over the radio industry, which talk radio is primarily a right-leaning enterprise. There are leftist talk hosts who are, popular, but they have very small market share in comparison to Republicans, and that is by choice. Leftist shows that talk leftist politics on radio don't survive. They can't get advertisers, but right-leaning shows not only get advertisers, but have, staying power. I mean, major staying power for little hosts to the big dogs and, the biggest stars ever. So What do you think about that position, that if we have regulation on the online social media, that eventually that will come into radio?
I mean, but, there is some regulation on radio. There is. Radio's not unregulated. Television's not unregulated. None of these platforms is unregulated. The only one that's unregulated is the internet. You do have regulations. There are things you cannot say. Okay? There are things you cannot say. There's equal time laws that go into effect, too. So, I mean, regulation on the radio, sure. I mean, I think it's okay. Like I said, there's already regulation. I'm not, I'm in the unfamiliar position here of arguing for regulation.
Me too.
I understand the point he's making, but not, all right, let me put it to a different way. John and Joe, who work at the corner store, nobody's giving them a radio show. Nobody's giving them a television show. I could have a podcast and have listeners do a radio show. I reach millions of people every day with my writing. You do the same on radio. When we're the minority. People don't have that reach. And so, John and Joe, they can't do that. They can have a Facebook page. They can have a Twitter. It is literally the public square of our generation. So I think you can't compare it. Not everybody can have a radio, but everybody can have a Facebook page. So
yeah,
it's really not comparable.
Yeah, I do. I get what you're saying, and I kind of hold the same position. The reason there's another thing about, so on right-leaning radio, it's not an echo chamber in which there are no opposing voices. So, I have leftists on this show, Democrats, libertarians, I have them on this show. And most radio programs, whether they're center-right to all the way to the right, usually have some of the opposing voices and viewpoints on the program. There is a huge difference in that than the kind of ability to clamp down via algorithms on Facebook and Twitter. They don't need to say, we're going to have this 3 people on here and kind of make a choice mentally. They can program an algorithm to say every instance of this word, like pro-life, we will limit.
I see it every day.
Yeah.
As an editor, I see it every day.
Yeah. I mean, I notice on Facebook, if I put a pro-life post up, 300, the engagement is literally 383 people.
Yep.
Or
you see very quickly.
Right.
You see very quickly what words are being censored.
Well, and I've even tried getting around the primary, the bigger buzzwords like pro-life, abortion, things like that. If I just type in interesting story, it still gets clamped down because they're also, the algorithm combs the entire post. The actual title of the piece and the linked article, it combs all of that as well. So there's no way for me to get around the algorithm. And it is, I think the thing that about the algorithm that really drives me the craziest, Carmine, is that the algorithm is working 24 hours a day, every day. It's working.
Another one you'll find out is you can't put mainstream media.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't type that out anymore because I noticed it was clamping down on my engagement. But that thing is going all the time. If I'm posting in the middle of the night because I've got insomnia, it's there. I can't escape it. And the person who programmed it doesn't even have to monitor it after they said it started. There's nothing like that in radio that we can use to censor out leftist speech or thought the way that they're doing to people on the right.
Correct. And in the place where it's most effective, because in the place where it's most effective is Twitter, is Facebook. That's the place where it's most effective. And I'll tell you the truth. People complain about Twitter a lot, but Twitter clamps down a lot less than Facebook does.
Oh, how can you tell?
Facebook is literally like Big Brother.
I think it's probably because they're just so much bigger. And I hate to be, I'm not trying to be insulting, but I'm just based observationally and anecdotally, Carmine, I think the reason why Facebook would be so much worse is because of the nature of the founder of Facebook, the fact that he's such a command and control person. And Jack, for all the things about him that I don't like that he does on Twitter, he's much more of a human being than Mark Zuckerberg is. They treat their businesses differently. Their face and outlook towards their companies is different. Facebook aims to take over the whole world, where Twitter is kind of like a little, bucking pony having fun in one area, and its growth is actually limited by Facebook. Like Facebook has done everything they can to keep it from getting even bigger.
Well, even when they stop, when your tweets used to automatically go to Facebook, and they killed that. You should be able to program that so that your Facebook post would go to Twitter, and your Twitter would go to Facebook, and then they killed that.
Yeah, I still love that because you only have to post once.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. But no, the algorithm thing is a real thing, and it's the topic of our time. I think eventually they're going to be regulated, and they could have avoided it, Stacy. They could have avoided it, but they refused. They refused. They're willing to die in their principles. You know what I mean? They refuse to cave in on allowing free speech, allowing people to hold different beliefs in them. And it said you have to, as a publisher, an editor, for a conservative website, you got to think every time you post a story. That you got to think harder than other people have to think. Because if you make them angry, it's done.
So let's talk about the list of people who were banned. Facebook banned Louis Farrakhan, Alex Jones, Milo Yiannopoulos, which I'm trying to remember. I thought Alex Jones had already been deplatformed by everybody, but maybe not Facebook. Who knows? Milo Yiannopoulos.
I had thought so too. I think maybe he might have just been taken off of WhatsApp. He was already off of Facebook.
Ah, okay. All right.
Facebook owns WhatsApp, so it's,
sure.
One and the same.
Yeah, and then Laura Loomer, Paul Nealon, and Paul Nealon is he was a senatorial candidate? No, House candidate. He ran against Paul Ryan. I remember meeting him at an event here locally in St. Louis. Paul Joseph Watson and InfoWars, the actual site's Facebook account. So those are the ones who've been booted off.
Correct.
I think I'm looking at these people and I'm reminded of that it's an old maxim. I don't know who said it or whatever, but they came for this group, and I said, "Oh, that's not me." And by the time then they come for me. Well, there's no one left, so obviously you're gone too. Is it so? You're at the Federalist paper, so this is the heart and soul of it's like the backbone of everything that our founders did. You can find out about it and learn about it in the Federalist papers. So few people actually read them. But isn't there something of a connection between the site that you run and this particular story, because it's so it's anti First Amendment?
Yeah. It's frightening. It's frightening, but there is obviously there's a connection. I think, people cheer when the people that they're against get. By the way, the Baltimore mayor just resigned. People they cheer when their enemy gets banned, until it's them. And, and that's, like you said, the First Amendment here. I think if people try and say, well, Facebook's a private company, the First Amendment doesn't apply. I get it. They do. But they've gone, in my opinion, beyond the private company. They are much more than a private company now. And with that comes the responsibility.
It does.
And they're really just going to, refuse to play ball. They have to be forced into it.
Yeah, and we see a little bit of this. The at the very tip of the leading edge of this is the European nations with their GDPR regulations, and they're fining Facebook and they're fining Google, and they're really much more advanced in the kind of regulating these online social media giants. And I think they're much more prone to do it just because they're American companies. If these were huge European companies, they would be much more hesitant to kind of go up against them the way that they have. I think it's good. It's good to see what they think is appropriate. We'll have to have different laws and regulations here because of our Constitution, but something needs to be done. So you mentioned, actually, Facebook characterized them as dangerous in their ban. Alex Jones has already responded, but I want to kind of circle around to what you just said there about the Baltimore mayor. The story there, listeners, is that this woman wrote a book and sold 800,000 copies of it, the mayor of Baltimore. She sold 800,000 copies of this book that she wrote, personally enriching herself, to government agencies and public school districts. That's a conflict of interest. That's there's a bunch of laws she broke there. And now you're saying she's just now resigned.
She is resigned, yeah. That just broke.
Well, yeah, but I think one of the things that is super important about what she's doing is that she got away with it. Meanwhile, Baltimore is one of the most dangerous cities in the entire country.
But you notice it's always Democrat mayors. Look at Kwame Kilpatrick in Detroit. That was the worst of the worst. But it's always Democrat mayors with these scams.
Well, sure. I mean, but I always say scratch a scandal, find a Democrat. That's one of my favorite things to say.
What is it? I didn't hear that.
Scratch a scandal, find a Democrat. That's what I always say.
It's the truth, man. It's absolute insanity. And this would be like a top story on almost any, mainstream media, but it's a Democrat mayor, so mainstream media buries it.
Well, I think it's a great opportunity for us on the right to connect together this idea that a lot of places that are cities, major cities, are run by Democrats, and the people who live there suffer from higher levels of poverty. The major diseases that plague Americans are found in higher concentrations there. They have lower economic outlooks, and the results that they get from their public services are often substandard. And that is due to the leadership they have there that they continue to vote in decade after decade, and it's Democrats. Very few major cities in this country are run by Republicans. And so I think people have to make a decision. Do you want to have an allegiance to a party, or do you want to have better living standards, a better quality of life? And this mayor enriching herself and not fixing problems that Baltimore has had for decades is just another example. Democrats do not rule well.
Never have. Never. I'm from North New Jersey. There was never a Republican in my lifetime in that city that was a mayor. I could probably stretch back into my mother, may she rest in peace, her lifetime. I don't think they ever had a Republican mayor. So, and Newark's always been, not always been, but I mean, in the past, near 100 years, has been a cesspool. So as you look at any major city that is poverty-stricken, you're going to find a Democrat mayor.
Well, we have a couple of options there. Just vote for somebody else. Try it. Give it a try. What have you got to lose, as the president always says? TheFederalistPapers.org is your website, Carmine. Thank you so much for joining us today, political and cultural commentator. Talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back with more. We'll take your calls. Give us a ring at 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. Be right back.
Can solid teamwork building principles apply to all of life? Here's Tony Dungy, author of The Soul of a Team, with today's uncommon moment.
I've spent decades considering what it takes for a team to rise to the top. I've learned that talent alone isn't enough. Through experience, both successes and failures, I've learned what generally separates high-achieving teams from those that fail to produce. I've said this before, any business, nonprofit, church, or other type of organization can benefit by applying these 4 simple yet highly effective principles I've been sharing. They are based on the letters in the acronym SOUL. Those principles are selflessness, ownership, unity, and larger purpose. Find your soul, and you'll create something bigger and longer lasting than you've ever imagined.
Tony Dungy, best-selling author of The Soul of a Team, from Tyndale House. More at CoachDungy.com.
Stephen Black.
Because my molester spoke to me while being molested that I had somehow caused this,
I had a deep sense of darkness and shame. The thing that I see in others is ministering to them, this deep sense of shame. And that's what brings about healing once that is discovered that their innocence was taken from them.
The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference is coming June 20th through the 22nd. Learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
Chris Brooks. A lot of parents raised their kids in church and did, in kind of scare quotes, everything right. And now they're looking at junior or sis or their son or daughter who's walked away from the faith and said, your God is not my God. And they're wanting to know, what do we do to reach them?
Tuned in to Equipped, weekday afternoons at 12 Central on Urban Family Talk.
This is Fox on Justice. Sniffing out crime may not always be legal. Police in East Moline, Illinois showed up outside the apartment of Derek Bonilla one day in 2015. They were there because of a tip that Bonilla was selling drugs. They came with a drug-sniffing dog. The dog did its job well, but as for the human officers, perhaps not. Just outside Bonilla's apartment, the dog sniffed out the presence of drugs coming from the bottom of the door. Police returned with a search warrant, and Bonilla was charged with possession of cannabis with intent to deliver. But Bonilla sniffed out a defense. He argued that having a drug-sniffing dog just outside his home without a search warrant was a violation of his Fourth Amendment right against unreasonable search and seizure. And so even though they later got a warrant and found drugs, the result of the sniff test should not be admissible. The Illinois Supreme Court agreed, and the case is now being appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. With Fox on Justice, Hank Weinblum, Fox News.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Why not call for Mueller to testify?
Because I'm not going to do any more. Enough already. It's over. If there's any dispute about a conversation, then he'll come. But I'm not going to retry the case. I'm not calling McCann. It is over.
That was Senator Lindsey Graham, and I'm here for angry Senator Lindsey Graham. He cut up a little bit in the testimony yesterday as well. I got to say, I need him to come out stronger earlier than that, though. When Senator Mazie Hirono was she was just lambasting, just tearing into the president and AG Barr to their faces, and the Republicans just sat there and let it go on for a while. So, hey, look, you know what? Get up faster than that. Don't allow. She said things about the president that no sitting senator should say. They're part of the same government. It's just, I love seeing it when the same people who say that the president is too rough in his language, then they talk about him, I mean, literally like a dog. It was terrible. Let's go to the phones. Today's Thursday. I'm like losing track of what day it is. That's what happens when you go out of town. I just want to let you know. So disorienting. Anyway, Dave in West Virginia. Hey, thanks for calling the show today.
You're welcome.
Hey, what's your comment?
Old Uncle Joe is not so sharp. Has he never heard anything that Gordon Chang has been talking about China?
Yeah.
Gordon Chang is an expert on China, and apparently old Uncle Joe hasn't heard about it.
No, apparently he hasn't. Thanks for calling the show. I think it's not just Gordon Chang. There's so many great experts writing about the China threat. And it's not just our intellectual property. It's their booming, birth tourism business where they get their children children from well-to-do families, they get them the right to attend public schools and universities here in this country with in-state tuition because they're American citizens. They bring them here, bring the pregnant women here to have birth and become Americans. There's also the stealing and theft of our intellectual property through us having factories there, flooding the market with cheap copycats of our ideas. They learn how to do stuff from us. They also place a lot of their government people in the role of venture capitalists, and they fund a lot of innovative new emerging technologies in Silicon Valley to steal, again, the intellectual property in exchange for venture capital funding. They also send students who are Chinese nationals. They pay the out-of-state tuition at our top universities. They get in there and they go into the research departments and they literally cannibalize they learn everything they can, take everything they can, send it right back to China, and that helps the Chinese to learn how to do what we do. It's like watching a big bully snatch the lunch off of a kindergartner. It's ridiculous. Why do we allow that? I could see if we were one of those tiny countries that just didn't have any way of defending itself and we didn't know what was going on, but we know all of this stuff. I'm not telling you things that we just learned, fresh, new things that nobody's ever heard of before. This is all old hat that's been going on for decades. So let's go to the phones again. Joe in Arkansas. Thanks for calling the show.
Yeah, thanks, Stacy. What I wanted to comment on was the issue of the big tech companies being able to do whatever they wanted because they're private companies. And I once read a book by a Colorado farmer. It was called War, Central Planning, and Corporations. And he said that in the early days of this country, it was not so easy to start a corporation. He said that what you had to do was you had to go before Congress and convince Congress that your corporation was going to act in the public interest. And if you did, if you were successful, they would give you a corporate charter that was good for 20 years. And then at the end of the 20 years, again, you had to go before Congress again. And if you were successful again in convincing Congress that your corporation was serving the public interest, then they would renew your charter for another 20 years. But they did not intend that corporations could do just anything they wanted. And so I think it's in the tradition of America, the real tradition of America and the intention of the Founding Fathers, that corporations would be regulated by the government so that they would act in the public interest.
That's an interesting point. So you're talking about old school days. Nowadays, anyone with a weird idea, you can start a sock company, just, go down to you don't actually have to have the LLC right away. That's an interesting perspective. Thank you, Joe. That is fascinating. Wow. So call lines are still open, 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037 if you want to join us. You know what? So let's talk about this Alabama Democrat. This is a big story, and the reason is because I'm finding it harder and harder to stomach the unmasking of the Democrats on the issue of abortion. I can remember years past that I thought, things would be so much easier for us in the pro-life movement if people who support abortion would just tell the truth about what they really believe. If Planned Parenthood would stop lying about what they do. If people who support abortion would just say, we know it's a baby, we're fine with killing it, now what? I've said that many times. But now that they're doing it, I regret wishing for that. And the reason is because it's so vile and so disgusting and so hard to stomach listening to people actually tell us what they really believe. I always think to myself, when they get to a place where they have to tell the truth about it, they'll change their minds. They won't believe that. They won't push this. That's what I always thought. That's not the case. This guy is an Alabama Democrat. He's talking about the bill that Alabama just passed. It's an anti-abortion bill. It's a pro-life bill, and it's a good one. And he just came out, and people are milling around in the video. People are milling around him, in the floor there in the legislative body. And he's just talking away right into the microphone. Like the same way if I was out someplace in the public and I was talking about my grocery list or, picking up one of the kids from school, that kind of matter-of-fact way, because you're talking about something that's benign and not a big deal. That's how he's talking about killing babies either while they're unborn or killing kids through the electric chair because they're criminals, because those are the only two options. Listen to this guy. It's number one.
All I'm saying to you, it ought to be a woman's choice. I'm not about to be as a male tell a woman what to do with her body. She has the right to make that decision herself. To rape or incest. Some kids are unwanted. So you kill them now, kill them later. You bring them in the world unwanted, unloved. Then you send them to the electric chair. So you kill them now, kill them later. But the bottom line is that I think we should be making this decision.
So he says he's a man and he can't make decisions about a woman's body. He says the kids are unwanted. So the ones who are being aborted are unwanted. Now, first of all, a huge percentage of the abortions that happen in this country are to women who already have children. And I've many times mentioned before, anecdotally speaking, about the friends that we have who have 5 kids. And obviously these are middle-class families and, but we also know, some families who aren't exactly flush with cash, who have more than 3 kids, and they're making it just fine too. So it's this is a lie from the pit of hell that if you want to have a kid, you need to be able to commit yourself to spending a couple $100,000 on that kid from birth to the end of college, or $450,000. I don't remember what the number is now. That's not true. In America, the choices that you make determine how much you have to spend on a kid. And if you live in a major metropolitan area and you decide you don't want your kid to go to public school and you're not going to homeschool and you're going to pay private school tuition and you have 3 or 4 kids, that's going to take a bite out of your income. Unless one of you is working at that private school or that Christian school, that's going to take a bite out of your income. But you can also choose to homeschool. People can choose to live outside of the metro area. We know couples who, after living in the city, and I shouldn't say in the city, in the metro area, so within the higher cost of living portion, they decided to move to lower cost of living options further out, put their kids in public school out there where you can still say Merry Christmas and they still say the Pledge of Allegiance at the beginning of the day. And, a teacher, if your kid says, I'm scared, will you pray with me? The teacher will pray with, these schools still exist. These towns still exist. They've taken pay cuts, but they also were able to buy much more affordable homes and their cost of living went down. The idea that he's trying to get you to accept is that every single child who's aborted in this country, 958,000 for the last reportable year, that they were all single moms, rape and incest victims, people who didn't have any other option. The kids were completely unwanted. Sometimes the babies are wanted, but it's the husband or boyfriend who's telling the woman, you get that abortion, or I'm leaving, or you get that abortion, or you know what's going to happen to you. Sometimes the situation is that the mom wants the baby, but they've been told they don't have any other choice. So his mantra is just another way of Democrats. First of all, they're unmasking themselves. Look, if we don't kill these babies in the womb, they're going to grow up to be criminals. Are they? I heard, and I think I shared it on the show, it was Senator Rand Paul was talking about how many geniuses we abort every year. I think it was like 4,500 geniuses a year. How many engineers? Because obviously with all the statistics that we keep as a nation, we're able to tell out of every 1,000 babies or 100,000 babies that are born, how many of them will turn out to be based on historical data. You can plug data into Excel spreadsheets. Then you can create a chart with that data, and then you can have a start point and an end point 10 years from now. And you can tell the Excel spreadsheet to extrapolate the data. In other words, use the data from the previous 10 years or whatever, how many years you plug in. The more years you plug in, the more accurate the extrapolations are. And you can tell it to stop extrapolating however many years you want to in the future. And it will tell you, using probability, what the likelihood is, how many of this or that, how many breaks. And the reason I know how to do this is because that's what I was taught in technical school for the Air Force, how to collect data and sort it and then plug it in and extrapolate for trends. So we would know what the likelihood is of a fleet of 30 aircraft having 95% of them being operationally ready 95% of the time, let's just say, just for example. And then if they give me different parameters, I would plug in more data and usually into an Access database and then import it into Excel and then create the charts and spreadsheets. And then I'd have to actually kind of read it and analyze it and then write up reports that would go with it and then turn that in or go give the presentation to the commander or whoever wanted the information. And so we know that in addition to what he's calling all these unwanted babies, because invariably there are some babies who are aborted because they're unwanted, but there are so many others in that mix who are being aborted because they believe these lies that are being peddled by people like this man. And notice I'm not saying his name. He gets no fame from me for being this kind of person. His evil and depravity don't get him a mention on this show. And you can find the link to it, online. it's Alabama Democrat on fetuses. Kill them now or you can kill them later. So we have time here for one quick phone call, maybe two. Milton in Michigan. Hey, thanks for calling the show today.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yeah, I just have one comment to make about what Joe Biden said about China. And in one way, it's an insult to China for him to say that. In another way, they probably love to hear him say that. The President of the United States is supposed to be the commander-in-chief of the military forces. I would love to be a commander and have the enemy think I'm too stupid to do anything.
Mm-hmm.
That's a recipe for defeat. That's my comment on what he said. It's ignorance.
Thank you. And it's a comment well made, Milton. Thank you for sharing that. You know, from the perspective of the Chinese, because they have got their hooks and tentacles into so much of American culture, they know what all of our problems are. They know what all of our strengths are. And they are really good at capitalizing on both. They're the ones who were behind the fentanyl, the rush of fentanyl into Mexico that was being pumped into our country. They're responsible partially for lowering the life expectancy of Americans because so many Americans died due to fentanyl and heroin overdoses and all of that. I mean, but they're not a threat to us. In what universe? You know, if y'all watch the Marvel Universe stuff, in what universe? We know there's only one universe, but still. All right, Colette in Kentucky. Hey, you have quick time to make a comment. Welcome to the show.
Hello. I mainly just wanted to comment about abortion. I know you were talking about the different laws that different states have put in place with abortion, and I just wanted to say that Kentucky has some pretty stringent laws on abortion, and the abortion clinic in Louisville doesn't listen to any of them. They do what they want anyways, and there are no consequences. These women can go in at 22 weeks and have an abortion. And so I guess I just feel hopeless about the laws at this point. Like, even if we have a pro-life governor or whoever that makes laws, they're just not being listened to, and it's just like open defiance, and no one's doing anything about it.
Well, you know what, Colette,
comment.
thank you for calling and talking about that. And what I've learned here in St. Louis from our Pregnancy Resource Center is that it has to be us. It's the church. It's all of us banding together, us Protestants with the Catholics, and you get out there at that Planned Parenthood that you were just talking about, and y'all sit there and you pray every day. You set up schedules, and every day that you're there, you decrease the number of women who actually make that choice to have an abortion. That is proven. It's trackable literature. I'll actually give it to you in the next, when we get back. Look, if you're leaving us now, God bless you from the heartland. If you're sticking around, onenewsnow.com news and information is up next. StacyOnTheRight.com. God bless.
Urban Family Talk. Urban Family Talk.
Always stay up to date with the latest in the culture war from the news team of One News Now. Use the One News Now mobile app. It neatly categorizes news and articles from the One News Now website in an easy-to-find format. You can read the stories, watch videos, and conveniently share any news story. It's now available for download from your phone's app store.
Truth, wisdom, empowerment. Urban Family Talk, a ministry of the American Family Association.
For American Family News, I'm Chris Woodward. House Minority Leader Kevin McCarthy is pushing back after House Speaker Nancy Pelosi said Attorney General William Barr committed a crime by lying to Congress. Barr was a no-show at a House Judiciary Committee hearing today, saying he did not want to be questioned by committee lawyers. McCarthy says it was Chairman Jerry Nadler who caused the problems.
We expected to hear from AG Attorney General Barr. Chairman Nadler decided to change the rules to satisfy the very obvious desire to impeach President Trump.
Conservative commentator Stephen Moore is no longer under consideration for a Federal Reserve Board post. President Trump tweeted today that Moore had decided to withdraw from the Fed process. Moore told Fox News Channel after that it was too tough on him and his family.
It was too difficult for us. And I feel bad because I feel like I've let a lot of people down, and the president most of all. He was incredibly nice and kind when I told him about this, and he understood. But, I'm bummed out.
Earlier this week, Moore told reporters he was all in on his bid for the Federal Reserve Board. Moore's past statements and actions were drawing heavy scrutiny, including unpaid alimony and child support, his past comments about women, and a 2016 remark about kicking former President Barack Obama out of public housing. Flooding has caused parts of Davenport, Iowa to be underwater. Fox's Jeff Manasso reports.
Business and homeowners in parts of flooded Davenport are using boats to get their first look at the damage. In some cases, a total loss after the city's temporary flood protection gave way along the Mississippi River.
It was just surreal to watch the wall just begin to roll over and the water just pouring out like a bucket.
2 or 3 minutes and we have what you see here.
Continued flooding expected along the Mississippi and many other rivers throughout the central U.S. that remain above or near flood stage because of the recent snowmelt and heavy rains. Jeff Manasso, Fox News.
A new survey finds many Austrians lack basic knowledge of the Nazi genocide, even though a concentration camp was just outside the city of Linz, and some of the key perpetrators of the Holocaust were from Austria. Meanwhile, the chief executive officer of Jewish Material Claims Against Germany, the organization that did the survey, says the numbers were in line with findings in the U.S. and Canada. Now, World War II was a long time ago, but it wasn't that long ago, so how could this be? Dr. Alex McPherson had this to say on AFR's Today's Issues program.
It's explained by secular progressive revisionist education. And, I read this, and it does make my heart heavy. It reminds me of the very famous quote by Santayana that says, "Those who do not learn history are doomed to repeat it." And, on this National Day of Prayer, I am speaking, doing interviews, and I'm calling people, yes, to pray, but to understand and to be conversant on American history, our rich history steeped in Christianity, and to know our history and to know, like you say, World War II history.
More on this story at onenewsnow.com. In final news this hour, more service cancellations at churches in Sri Lanka over fears of further suicide attacks.
The Catholic Church in Sri Lanka's capital, Colombo, saying services in the city are being cancelled for a second weekend. This after bombings on Easter Sunday at churches and hotels left more than 250 people dead. Sri Lanka's government has said it suspects the Islamist group blamed for the attacks could be planning more. The FBI is among foreign agencies helping Sri Lanka with its investigation. Simon Owen, Fox News.
That is American Family News for this hour. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and download the free One News Now mobile app for Apple and Android devices. I'm Chris Woodward. Thank you for listening.
Dexter's. What's happening in our cities, what's happening in our government, what's happening in our churches, this mess that's going on in the United States of America, the reason for it, the blame can go squarely on God's people. God's not expecting the heathens of the world to do his work here on earth. That job goes to you and to me.
Time to get back to God. Weekday afternoons at 4 Central on Urban Family Talk. She's sharp, pointed, and insightful. This is Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
You have to understand, in Venezuela, gun ownership is not something that is open to everybody. So if the military have the guns, they have the power. And as long as Nicolas Maduro controls the military, he controls the country.
Joe Biden was there he was there for the time that the Chinese built the stationary islands in the South China Sea, which are essentially aircraft carriers. They put military radars on them, put military combat planes on them. And so Joe Biden's got a lot to answer for.
And now, Stacy Washington.
Welcome. StacyOnTheRight.com is where you can hit the subscribe button. You can go to UrbanFamilyTalk.com and AFR.net We'd love to have you, get our newsletters and get our content all the time. This hour on the program, we're going to be chatting with Pastor Miles McPherson. He's the pastor of the Rock Church in San Diego. He's also the author of several books and a former NFL player for the San Diego Chargers. He's going to join us to talk about his latest book, The Third Option, Hope for a Racially Divided Nation. And I met Pastor McPherson at the National Religious Broadcasters Convention. And when we met, I said, hey, I'd love to have you come on the program. And so he signed his book over to me. If you're watching on the live stream, I'm holding it up. And he signed it over to my son because I asked him to, because I wanted the copy. I bought the copy for him. And it says, God bless you, Miles. And then he signs it, Miles. And he puts the verse in here, 1 John 4:20. 1 John 4:20 is in the King James. If a man says, I love God, and hateth his brother, he is a liar. For he that loveth not his brother whom he hath seen, how can he love God whom he hath not seen? So that is part of the foundational principle that you're going to find in the book. And so he's going to come on and talk about that. He was the speaker at a breakfast that Madison and I attended while we were there. And I tell you what, it was unexpected. The first, I'd say maybe 6 or 7 minutes of his speech, I was just sitting there listening like, where is he going with this? Like, where is he going with this? So the reason I'm recounting that to you now is because I don't want you to get turned off by what you're going to hear him say. I want you to hear him and hear his heart on this matter. We do need reconciliation, and the reconciliation that we need is man to man, and it only comes from Jesus Christ. And by man to man, I mean human to human. And so the way that he frames it, it's a little different than you may have heard before, but it goes back to the gospel and what God has for us. And I think it's good for us to, we got to hear these things and then try them in the scriptures and pray about them and see what God has for us, because God will speak to us and let us know in what direction he would have us to go. So it's going to be a good interview. It's really exciting to chat with him. He's an impressive backstory in his career and everything. We'll get into that as well. So what are we going to be talking about right now? Well, you heard a little smidgen of it, but I want you to hear the whole bit. So, the Venezuela story is still, it's crazy what's going on down there. And I really have just a lot of sympathy for the Venezuelan people, even though they did the classic order. Hey, they want us to give up our guns. Okay. Hey, we should nationalize all of our, okay. Hey, we should, vote someone in who's a socialist who's promising all these government programs. And now they're literally fighting for their lives. And it's because socialism always leads to this. Dictators always have to kill the people when they rise up because they're starving. They don't have anything else they can do. The toolbox for socialism is not replete with ideas that work. If it did, all these socialist countries that you see around the country that are really only working because they're subsidized militarily by the United States, they'd be crumbling as well. You take away the military subsidies from the United States and all of our active duty service members and contractors and civilians working and living and boosting these economies. You take all that away and you see what's happening in Venezuela would be happening all over the place. For those countries that are socialist in kind of their social policies and they're socialist in their healthcare, which means they don't have good healthcare, but they use capitalism in the other areas in their free market, then they're not truly socialist countries. They're just countries that have horrible social policy, but they operate as capitalist countries. They don't nationalize the means of production, but they do everything else. You see how that works? So I wish everybody was forced to have the accurate description of what they were running as a country, instead of everybody claiming, all these Western countries saying, we're socialists. Yeah, they're not totally socialist. Otherwise, they would not be functioning. So here is this MSNBC reporter. He's talking about the Venezuelans getting run down in the streets by their own government. It's number 5.
he appears to still control the military. You have to understand, in Venezuela, gun ownership is not something that is open to everybody. So if the military have the guns, they have the power. And as long as Nicolas Maduro controls the military, he controls the country. And Juan Guaido and his supporters have tried to peacefully protest. They have gathered in large numbers. What we saw today when he met early this morning and stood there in front of those wearing uniforms appear to be rank and file members who may have switched their allegiance. We have seen over the recent months those who have switched their allegiance, but not en masse. We have not seen large numbers of the troops in Venezuela switching their allegiance from Nicolas Maduro to Juan Guaido.
So without the military, they don't have the ability to continue to maintain the reign of Nicolas Maduro. But notice this guy who's a hardcore leftist, he even had to make the point that if the citizens were armed, the military wouldn't be able to do that. And I don't think that our military would do things like this to us. I don't think that, because our military is obviously, it's full of Americans. But I gotta say, this can happen in any country. And so it may not be feasible or something that we can imagine now, where we are now at this point in our history, where our military is. But in a future where we've taken all the guns away from the citizens, and a future where, we have a socialist dictator running the country, then those are not going to be the same military types that we have right now. It's a different shift in everything. Everyone is different at that point. And that's what conservatism is working hard to fight. That's what we're fighting as Christians. We don't want a government that can assume control over the different parts of our lives, making us vulnerable to attack in our personal lives by disarming us, making us unable to speak the truth, especially for those of us who are Christians, who we're speaking the truth from the Word of God. We don't want that. That's what we're fighting against. And so Venezuela is a cautionary tale. Now, speaking of the Second Amendment, I thought this was a fascinating story. You've got this guy who is totally mentally ill. And again, he doesn't get name checked here on the show. He's running around carjacking, and he needs more ammunition. So he drives over to a Walmart in a car that he's just carjacked. He gets out and goes in and shoots the glass out of the ammunition case and takes some ammunition. People in the Walmart they hear the pops, they're running and whatnot. He gets back out into the car, to the parking lot, and he starts shooting people in the parking lot. He's trying to carjack another vehicle. So he shoots this father and son while they're sitting in the car, and they put the car in reverse, and he backs up a little bit, and then the assailant, the carjacker, gets shot. The person who shot him is a pastor who's also a firearms expert. He shot him and killed him. Everyone from the news people all the way down to the people in the parking lot who were shot, people all over are saying that this pastor prevented a mass shooting someplace else, because the guy had come and basically, he shot the glass out of that ammo case and stole all that ammunition. Who knows what he was going to go and do with it? The pastor has been called a hero. Now, they haven't released the pastor's name, but there was another armed citizen on the scene, and he actually ran up as well. He saw the pastor shoot the armed man who was shooting into the vehicles. And when he saw that, he said, "Oh my goodness, I'm here to help. And the pastor said, "Can you secure this area for me?" And so he secured the area, and the pastor kind of retreated, because what you're supposed to do is if you have to use your firearm, you're supposed to then put it down. You have to stay by it to make sure no one else can use it, but you need to, kind of have your hands up and be in the neutral position when the police arrive, or they'll think you're the one who's doing the wrong deed. So there's a process to that. So there's a Tumwater spokesman talking about this incident, what they were tweeting out about the story. And it's, it's a wonderful, wonderful example of good guy with a gun who's on the spot, who takes care of innocent people. The guy who was shot in the neck, the dad, he's paralyzed. This is a terrible, terrible situation. And you just have to wonder how many more people would have been injured or maimed had that pastor not been quick on his feet and armed and ready to go when he saw this unfolding in front of him in this parking lot. And it was a Walmart parking lot, if I'm not mistaken. They've also set up a GoFundMe account for the victims of the shooting. And I'll definitely post a story on Facebook if you want to read it for yourself. But it's just, again, disarmament is never the answer. It's the answer that we need is we need more Christians activated out there working in the world, in our nation, spreading the gospel of Jesus Christ and getting it out there so that we can change the lives and the hearts of more people. And when we do that, then we see the results of that, the outgrowth of that. Trying to address this through taking things away from law-abiding citizens like firearms, or taking companies away from people who run companies, that's just not it. That's not the way we want to go. So call lines are open, 866-963-2037, 866-963-2037. So and I did mention, but I just want to stress, because we're all in the Second Amendment here, that the taking of the guns back in 2012 in Venezuela is what's made this whole thing possible. It's the foundation to what you see in Venezuela right now. Without them giving up their guns, they would be able to defend themselves. They would be able to rise up. The fact that citizens can rise up makes it so that government officials behave differently. Just here in our country, look at the kind of violence that conservatives are putting up with, are probably armed to the teeth and not doing anything about it, from Antifa members and deranged Democrats suffering from Trump derangement syndrome. Let's look at it. Imagine how much worse it would be if they didn't think we were armed. They don't think about it. It's clear that they don't think about it when they're punching people in the face and screaming and pouring drinks on them in restaurants. They're not thinking about it. But imagine if those who are even more violent than the ones we're currently dealing with thought that everybody in the country was unarmed. Wow, things would be so different. It would be such a travesty what we would be experiencing. So the key is, obviously, we want to get the gospel out there. We want to speak the truth in love. We want to turn people away from the negative path, the downward spiral, and we want to put them on the path to, eternal victory. But just like the disciples had swords, they were armed, we can be armed too. It's up to us to make that decision for ourselves, but we have the right to do that because of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights, which in the Second Amendment gives us the right to keep and bear arms, and that right won't be infringed. So these stories kind of connect up and let us know that we're in the right spot. Now, again, once you go down that path, you have still some guns on the streets in Venezuela. It's not that there are no guns in the country, but the only people who have them are criminals. So people who are willing to break the law have guns. Now, are all of these criminal lawbreakers in the area of guns, are they all terrible people? Well, it's up to you to kind of navigate that, isn't it? How would you know? They don't have the right to own guns anymore. Their country is in a shambles. Criminals who have guns get to take over and kind of control the situation. And of course, the military and the police, who are all under the auspices of the dictator. This is not someplace we want to go. All right, when we get back, we'll have Miles McPherson. He's the pastor of the Rock Church in San Diego, former NFL player, right after this.
Our Holy Land tour for March of 2020 is set. Hello, everyone. I'm Tim Wildman, president of American Family Association and American Family Radio. Last year, we sold out in August, and I expect us to do that again this year. There is such a high demand, especially among Christians in America, to see Israel, the land of the Bible. So we're going again in March on our annual trek. So I wanted to go ahead and let you know If you want to sign up and register, get more information, whatever the case may be, if you want to go to our website, twholyland.com, twholyland.com, everything is there. twholyland.com. You can even print off a brochure from that website. It's going to be a wonderful time visiting Israel with brothers and sisters from across our country as we go to the Holy Land in March. So go ahead and get signed up now, twholyland.com.
This is Viewpoints with Kirby Anderson.
Today is the National Day of Prayer. It is a vital part of our American heritage. The first call to prayer happened before the American Revolution. In 1775, the Continental Congress called on the colonists to pray for wisdom as they considered how they would respond to the King of England. Perhaps one of the most powerful calls to prayer came from President Abraham Lincoln during the Civil War. In 1863, he issued a proclamation for a day of humiliation, fasting, and prayer. Here is some of that proclamation. He said, "We have been the recipients of the choicest bounties of heaven. We have been preserved these many years. In peace and prosperity, we have grown in numbers, wealth, and power, as no other nation has ever grown. But we have forgotten God. We have forgotten the gracious hand which preserved us in peace and multiplied and enriched and strengthened us. We have vainly imagined in the deceitfulness of our hearts that all these blessings were produced by some superior wisdom and virtue of our own. Intoxicated with unbroken success, we have become too self-sufficient to feel the necessity of redeeming and preserving grace, too proud to pray to the God that made us." In 1952, Congress passed and President Harry Truman signed a resolution declaring an annual National Day of Prayer. In 1988, President Reagan signed into law a bill that designated the first Thursday of May as the time for a National Day of Prayer. It is estimated that there have been more than 130 national calls to prayer, humiliation, fasting, and thanksgiving by presidents of the United States. There have been 60 presidential proclamations for a National Day of Prayer because every president has signed these proclamations. Today is the National Day of Prayer. Please pray for this nation and its leaders. I'm Kirby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
For a free copy of Kirby's booklet, A Biblical View on Socialism, go to viewpoints.info/socialism. That's viewpoints.info/socialism.
Welcome back to Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. We do not have our guest just yet, but we will definitely work on getting our guest in just a couple of minutes. At this point, though, I would love to go to a little bit of audio that we have here. It's one of the Democrats talking about Medicare for all and how that bill would kill 1 million private insurance jobs. Kind of crazy. Definitely not something that we want to see happen. 1 million jobs. Can you imagine what that would do to the GDP and what, all of our economic metrics? Yeah, this is what they're leading with over on the left. It's number 2.
But I think that's very important. And then the other thing I want to say is there are a lot of people who work in the private insurance industry. We have thought very carefully about how we take care of those folks because we think they're very important. And so there's about 1 million people that we think will be displaced if Medicare for All happens. We have set aside 1% a year of the total cost of the bill for 5 years to take care of a transition for those employees in the private insurance sector so that they can either, if they're able to retire, that might be one, pension guarantees, job training, they can move into a different system.
So we all know how that works. Now, I've been in high support of the we've seen this wonderful job training push from the White House, and you've seen all these companies say that they're willing to invest in job training for employees, and that's great. But to intentionally push 1 million people out of work and then expand the government in ways that we actually can't afford, that's crazy. That's absolutely crazy. So, again, getting the whole issue of the Medicare for all off to the side, it still leaves us with, this, it's kind of a ridiculous it's just unworkable. The way that we do something like that against the will of the American people, it's again essentially one of those issues where you can see where Democrats just want to force people into this. They don't care about the 1 million people who would be displaced. They don't care that this kind of disruption to a society, this is something that has to happen naturally, not something that you would force and kind of jerk into the system. It's a disruption. It's something that we don't need. I'll keep giving y'all all the good reasons why we don't need it, all the good answers. I will keep doing that because we have to do it. So during the first hour, we were talking a little bit about this abortion issue where they're saying, the caller said she wanted to come in, or she's got these laws in her state in Kentucky that are very restrictive on abortion, but they're ignored. And I was talking about the emphasis on praying outside of the clinic and the change that it makes. Now, this is not just anecdotal evidence I'm talking about. In the movie Unplanned, we actually see them talking about in the movie, which is based on the real life of Abby Johnson. She said, look, when we have people outside praying, we have lower activity inside the clinic. So if you want to stop, if you want to see it come to a halt, you want to see the activity there get lower, you absolutely have to have people outside praying outside the clinic. And it's not like in the past where abortion opponents were painted as these wild, crazy people. Not at all. It's much more of a situation where the people themselves are out there praying and just doing their best and being very kind and sweet and gentle-hearted about it. It's nothing negative. It's nothing grotesque. It's not people jumping up and down or screaming at women. It's prayer. Some of it's out loud, some of it's silent. So tracking these numbers from 2009, we're talking about Missouri here. You have, in 2009, there were 6,881 abortions. And then every year after 2009, you see the number decrease. For 2018, the number of abortions in Missouri was 2,472. That's a huge reduction in the yearly abortion number for the state of Missouri. And they track this with the lawmakers have been pro-life, the frontline operators, the prayer warriors on the sidewalk counselors, people who counsel the workers at the Pregnancy Resource Center, and then people who donate to the Pregnancy Resource Center and help fund the work that they're doing. And so they also launched a mobile medical service. They have a number of these vans. They're actually like tour buses and RVs that have been converted on the inside to rolling medical centers where you can get all kinds of reproductive testing, basically a full suite of options. And these things are funded through donors and help reduce the abortion rate in the state of Missouri. So I have more information on this that I'd love to share with you. But the most important thing for us to do is to make sure that we're praying at home and in front of these clinics, and we can get a lot done that way. That's how God moves and works in spite of the laws being ignored. So I hope that helps. Right now, it's my pleasure to welcome Miles McPherson. He's a pastor of the Rock Church in San Diego, author of several books, including his new book, The Third Option, Hope for a Racially Divided Nation. He was also an NFL player for the San Diego Chargers. Pastor McPherson, thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm holding the book that you signed over to our son in my hand. And when you signed it over to him, you said 1 John 4:20. Now, and I was telling the listeners when I was kind of previewing you coming on today about how you spoke at the breakfast and how the first few minutes of your speech, I was kind of sitting there like, oh my goodness, where's he going with this? Because you're tackling an uncomfortable subject in your latest book.
That's what I do.
So how can we?
Hello?
How can we as Christians actually bridge this divide? The subheading on your book, it's a quote by Bishop T.D. Jakes from the Potter's House, a discussion about race that we desperately need, a must read. And the foreword is by Drew Brees. Why did you write this book?
Well, We live in such a divided culture, us versus them, and I wrote the book to give people tools on how to honor the things that we have in common. In every race conversation, it's about us versus them. You're always forced to pick one of two sides. This book is the third option, which is that we honor what we have in common. And if we look at all the things that we share, it'll bring us together. We're all 99.5% genetically identical. We all bleed red. We have a heart, lungs, liver, bones, and muscles, and we're all made in the image of God. And that's a lot of things to focus on and to share with one another. And if we can do that, I think we can heal the racial division that exists in our culture.
So when you talk about healing the racial division, I always draw a parallel between our interactions with each other, because sometimes we're nasty to each other and it has nothing to do with, permanent tan, lack of a permanent tan. And it has everything to do with the heart condition of the person who's dealing out the bad behavior and the person receiving it, how they respond. Again, heart condition, whether or not they've been connected to Jesus Christ, whether they're living for the Lord. And even when we don't always respond correctly. But you offer some strategies in the book. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think one strategy is to acknowledge that we all have blind spots because we are sinners. The heart is deceitful and desperately wicked. Mm-hmm. We don't even know how biased we are. We think just because we read the Bible or go to church that what we think and say is acceptable. But a person can be racially offensive without necessarily being a racist. And so there are a lot of people out there who think, well, I'm not a racist, so therefore everything I think and say isn't racism or isn't racially offensive. Not only are there people who are racist don't even realize it, but there are people who aren't racist, but they're still offensive, like saying you don't see color. They see that as something as uniting, but actually it's offensive to people of color because you're basically telling them you ignore what they are. So I think we have to realize that we have blind spots and take an opportunity to learn how to relate to people, learn about the things we don't know about other people, and learn that our perspective on the world is just our perspective. We're one of 7 billion people, so there are 6,999,000,000 other perspectives that are just as legitimate as yours.
And so you're seeking with this book to bring people together, because right now, politically and even outside of politics, the conversations tend to be, this is my group. I got to protect my group, and that's your group. Your group doesn't go well with my group. It's a lot of us versus them, but we share so much in common as Americans and things that should unite us, but we kind of leave those to the side because the discussion has become strictly about race.
Well, we share so much in common as human beings all over the world, even people on the other side of the world. They all want family. They all love food, sleep. They all want to know their purpose in life. So every human being on the planet shares thousands of things in common that we don't recognize. I think one of the solutions, if we can look at people and label them as neighbor, the number one commandment is to love God with your heart, mind, and soul, and to love your neighbor as yourself. Mm. What we do is we give people labels that are less than neighbor, that dehumanize them, whether they're black label, white label, immigrant label. And once we label them less than neighbor, we give ourselves permission not to love them. And so I think when we look at people, we have to relabel them. That's my neighbor, whether they like me or not, whether I know them or not, whether they look like me or not. That's the standard that God gave us.
So that's tough. What you're saying. You see what I'm saying? So, Pastor McPherson, you're not coming in here with any easy task. You're talking about on top of the frustration from not getting the sleep or whatever, personal issues you have going on and the perceived slight that you may be responding to. You're saying as Christians, because he's called us out from among them. As Christians, we are supposed to say, okay, that didn't feel so hot or that didn't come off right, but that's my neighbor. So I need to, as a form of worship, give them still my best response.
Yeah.
That's hard work.
Well, you know what? It's hard. You can say it's hard, but if I'm Jesus, I'm saying, let me put it in Miles' words, or let me speak for the Lord. What the heck do you think I gave you the Holy Spirit for?
Yes.
Of course. If it was easy, Jesus wouldn't have had to die.
Yeah.
and send the Spirit of God into our life. So, of course, this is like Christianity 101, and that's why we need to depend on the Holy Spirit, pray, humble ourselves before Him, deny ourselves, pick up our cross, and follow Him. This is exactly what the entire Bible is about. You know, the greatest commandment, the number one above every other commandment, is to love God, and the second's like it. And He said, if you can't do that, you need to slow your roll and stop, go back to the beginning. And so, yeah, I mean, of course, but you know, it's not really that hard. I think we don't do it, and the devil has deceived us to think it's so hard, and we're scared. But why should it be so difficult to love people? We were created for that very reason. People are wonderful.
Yeah.
And we talked ourselves out of building relationships. We think those people are scary and those people are that. When, you know, if you took the time to talk to somebody and hear their story, you would realize, man, they're just like me.
Okay, well, I want to go over this last. We have about 2 minutes left in this interview, and I can't let it go without. I'm on the third option, your book. On page 128, you talk about redefining fear, and you take the word fear and you break it down as an acronym, with F meaning face the facts, and then you have E, get educated about the other, A, be accountable to affirm one another, and then R, build relationships recognizing the image of God in everyone.
Yeah, everybody, think about it. Every single human was made in the image of God. That means every single person is created for the purpose of responding to the love of God. They can't not respond to the love of God. And you and I were made for the same reason. And so if we were focused on that and appeal to the image of God in people and love people, don't treat them like animals that feel like you have to beat to get to obey, which, by the way, you don't necessarily have to do that either.
Right.
Treat people like human beings. I know. Treat people like human beings. Love them, encourage them, and pray for them. Talk about Jesus to them. There's something in them that's going to respond to even against their will. They can't. The Holy Spirit's going to blast them, and they're going to, whether in your presence or when they're laying in bed that night, something's going to happen in their life. So we need to take the lead that Jesus gave us to love everyone unconditionally.
So I love that, because you're taking the like when I was saying it's so hard, and you said, well, obviously we need the Holy Spirit, but it's not too hard for us to do. Otherwise, God wouldn't have told us to do it, because He doesn't give us things that are too hard for us to do. He has equipped us. But you're also talking about the humanity factor, which we even do that to ourselves. We even do dehumanize ourselves in the way that we communicate with ourselves mentally, the way we kind of self-talk that's negative. And then we turn that outwards and we do it to other people. And what you're saying is grab the gospel, because the word of Jesus Christ is powerful and the Holy Spirit will do the rest. All we have to do is be open and willing to treat people as the word has told us we must do, as our neighbors. And then the rest of it kind of flows out from that.
Yeah, and you know, the verse says, love your neighbor as yourself. I think people need to realize, as the mouth speaks from the overflow of the heart, and if we're treating people bad, that means there's something defective about how we see ourselves. And it's an indictment on our own love for self or lack of love for self. And so, you know, we dehumanize ourselves when we are critical of others, and we insult the image of God in ourselves when we discriminate. We think we're exercising power, but really we're demonstrating weakness.
All right, Pastor McPherson, you could go on and preach, but I hear the music. So thank you for joining us. Thank you for this book. Thank you for your time today. Pastor McPherson, I'm going to put the link to purchase the book. I already got my copy. And thank you for your time today.
Yes, the third option, go to Amazon, the third option. God bless you.
All right, God bless. Talk to you again soon. We'll be back with more right after this.
Hi, this is Steve Tiber with 8 Days of Hope. We've been all over the country helping disaster victims who lose everything.
It's truly a blessing. I really don't have the words to express.
And yet they see a glimmer of hope when a volunteer shows up.
Building the home, that's the second reason we're here. The number one reason is to share the gospel and give them hope.
It's everything that's right in America. I mean, it really represents the best that we have to offer.
That's one of the main reasons for doing it, is being able to be the hands and feet of Jesus and coming out and working with so many wonderful volunteers.
I just feel like it's important in this day and age to teach a child how to serve.
Please go to our website, 8daysofhope.com, and click on Get Involved, submit your email address, and the next time we go anywhere with a disaster, we'll invite you to come along as well.
I love coming in the job room because you can see these pieces of paper. They aren't just a piece of paper. Right. It's a family that's hurting, and it's a gospel opportunity.
You know, I just thank God, for this moment. I mean, I'll be back in my home, and I know it's going to be awesome.
Come love others with 8 Days of Hope.
Miki Addison.
My challenge to you was to evangelize your children and to disciple your children and to give them the truth, because if you don't do that, then we have a culture that's waiting in the wings to disciple your kids and to make converts. And so I really believe and I expect the Lord to really set some people free today.
The Marriage, Family, and Life Conference is coming June 20th through 22nd. Learn more and register at urbanfamilytalk.com.
There are many ways you can listen to the shows of Urban Family Talk. One of those ways is through our very own app. Whether you have an iPhone or an Android, just go to the App Store and search for Urban Family Talk. You'll have immediate access to 24-hour programming as well as the podcast for each show. You'll be able to tune in no matter where you are. Speaking of tuning in, we have our own channel on another radio app called Tune In. Cool, right? Urban Family Talk is everywhere. Just download the app and take us wherever you go.
This is House Call for Health. A promising new treatment for peanut allergies may not be as promising as hoped. Peanut allergies happen when the immune system wrongly detects peanuts as harmful and causes a strong allergic reaction, which could include difficulty breathing. The treatment is called oral immunotherapy. Children are exposed to tiny amounts of peanut products to retrain the immune system. The therapy has shown success with many allergic children building up tolerance, but in an article published in The Lancet, researchers found that while the therapy worked well in many cases, some people developed allergic reactions and a small percentage experienced breathing problems known as anaphylaxis. Researchers say they're not recommending that immunotherapy be stopped, but they think more studies are needed to figure out a way to more safely treat peanut allergies. For more health news, go to foxnewshealth.com. House Call for Health, I'm Joy Piazza, Fox News.
You can download episodes of Stacy on the Right from the podcast page on AFR.net or UrbanFamilyTalk.com. Now, back to the show on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.
Welcome back to the program. Thank you so much for being with us today. I hope that people take that interview in the spirit in which it was given. Because as I was sitting there listening to him when he was giving the speech at that breakfast at NRB, he just he's speaking from the heart, and he has that that credibility coming from his backstory. Because when he was in the NFL, he actually battled a drug problem, and then left the NFL and went out into seminary school, and he got a degree in theology, and then started the church that he now pastors, which is an enormous church, 12,000 members, over 5 services each weekend, and it's in San Diego, California, a place that really needs godly people to minister and to bring people to the Lord. And so when he started speaking, and especially since he's he's from the NFL background, and he was cracking jokes about, because of the way that he appears, his physical form, a lot of people wonder, well, what are you? What background are you? And he says, I'm a human being. I'm a child of God. And then, of course, he will share his background, but he cracked a lot of jokes about that. And it was disarming because the subject matter is very hard. And I don't know anybody, to be honest with you, that when the subject of race comes up, people don't retreat into their own corner, even among friends, because people are tired of being called racist. People are tired of feeling that they've been subjected to racism. People are tired of talking about it. So it's a tough subject, but he's got on the back, where they normally have the blurbs, you have a lot of people that we've heard of before, who've come on alongside him, and they're supporting the book and what the book says, and kind of just to get us to go back to that original Great Commission that Jesus has given to us. We're to make disciples of all men, which means we're not just getting along with each other, which is already, people feel like getting along is insurmountable. It's not. He made an excellent point there. But it's also not just the getting along, but for us as Christians, it's being able to be kind enough and sweet enough in our presentation that we could tell someone about Jesus Christ and that they would hear it and want to know more, to open that door or plant that seed, as it were, so that the Holy Spirit could do the rest of the work. So it's not too hard for us to do. It's not too difficult for us. We can do it through the power of the Holy Spirit. And I think it's a great way for us to start just kind of resetting the way we see each other. I notice what I see when I'm out and running around, the most frequent thing I see is people being kind to each other, people treating each other like people. We do have a little bit of an issue with our news media painting at America as a place where everybody's at each other's throats and we're all fighting about this issue or that issue. There are a lot of serious issues facing our country, but I do think we have just an amazing ability to be the hands and feet of Jesus Christ to each other through serving each other and loving each other as neighbors. It's possible, and we should get back to it. So I thought that was it's a great book. I haven't made it all the way through, but what I've read so far has been very encouraging, just like the speech was. It was a good speech. So now, I want to get back to, and we were discussing this just a tad, but I want to make some points about what has been happening with the president. So I think what we've seen with the conclusion of the Mueller investigation is obviously we have people temper tantruming over on one side, but do you guys remember a few months ago, I want to say this happened a couple of times over the past 2 years. We were saying there were all of these Democrats saying they wanted bills. They wanted to be able to stop the president. They wanted a law passed in Congress. They wanted something to stop the president from firing Mueller. They didn't even want him to be able to fire Rosenstein. And they weren't getting that. They were like, the Republicans were like, you're not getting that. But the president had to make the decision that he was just going to ride this thing out. And at some point, he was entertaining, firing Mueller, but in the end, he didn't. He wrote it out. And so because of that, he is the most vetted president in the history of this country, because the investigation that was launched against him during the campaign that ran all the way through the first 2 years of his presidency, they turned over every rock and he came out clean. I think it's important for us to make that point. If we're going to sit up and listen to people continually rail about the possibility of still impeaching him, the possibility of still having more investigations, I don't see why the president has to continue to cooperate. In the beginning, I hated the idea of him cooperating, but I was fine with it because it was a special counsel, even if the appointment came from, fruit of the poisonous tree and all that good jazz. And now here we are. We have the president who's been investigated. They were unable to indict him or charge him with anything. And because of that, he can go forward with his agenda as best as can be done, with divided government. But should he put up with more investigations? Should he cooperate with more witch hunts? I'm inclined to say no. And I'm not an attorney. I don't play on TV. I know I make that joke a lot, but it's interesting because I'm not the only one who has that thought process. So tomorrow on the show, we will be hearing some audio from Joe DeGeneva, who has this knack for kind of like, he'll say something about what he thinks the president's going to do, and then a few weeks later, it happens. It's almost like they're simpatico or communicating on the side, whatever. So there's something that the president has learned. I think he learned from the mistakes of Nixon and Clinton, and he basically just gritted his teeth and rode the investigations out. And that can be a little bit of a lesson for us when we're going through something difficult. The instinct is to drop and run. Just get out of there. Just end it. Do whatever you can to get away from the actual number or the not the number, the negative consequence or whatever's happening, the persecution, if you will, whatever. We don't want to do that. We don't want to run away. President Trump held it out. He also, just as a side note, pardoned Scooter Libby, which was an error that Bush 43 didn't actually rectify. And so, you know, the obstruction of justice charge is something that I don't think the Democrats are going to give up on. I also don't think it's going to go anywhere, but they don't have anything left to talk about. And by continuing that, they're hoping to get some of their ratings back. I noticed yet another story about the declining ratings of all three of the kind of opposition networks. And if they would just report straight news, I'm sure they could get some of their viewers back, because people do want to know what's going on in the world. But if it's only going to be anti-Trump network and President Trump has been exonerated from, you know, Russian collusion and all of that, then they're probably not going to get those viewers back. Now, I am also going to be, just a preview, I'm going to be checking in with Paula Bolliard of PJ Media. She has a story about homeschoolers and homeschool families. And the story is actually over on Fox News. And she's pretty upset that Fox News is taking the tack that homeschool families need to be regulated. And there's a lot more to the story. So there's kind of two sides to it. And one of the sides is kind of unexpected when I was reading it. So I want to preview that. We're going to see if we can get her back on the program to talk about that. She wrote a piece for PJ Media and in response to the piece over at Fox News. So we'll see what we can do about that. And then for the rest, so you got Bill Barr, yesterday's testimony. And I don't know about you guys. I wasn't able to see as much of it as I wanted to. I have so much going on right now with the one student. The middle kid is graduating from high school. Our college student's coming home from her first year of college. And then the younger one, she's along for the ride, but she's got some stuff going on too. And so I have not been able to sit and kind of really absorb all of the testimony that I wanted to. I've just been able to catch, you know, chunks of it. But it's pretty amazing the way Bill Barr handled the Democrats yesterday. Let me give you just a little taste of what I'm talking about. Blumenthal was asking AG Barr about whether or not he made a memorandum of his conversation about the Mueller report. And Barr says, no, I didn't. Blumenthal, did anyone, either you or anyone on your staff, memorialize your conversation with Robert Mueller? And Barr said, yes. Blumenthal said, may we have those notes? Barr said, no. Blumenthal said, well, why not? Barr said, why should you have them? I think it's perfect. So is it possible that Barr might be even more Trump-tastic than Donald Trump? If so, yes, yeehaw, giddy up. Let's see this thing through. I thought it was pretty fantastic because they couldn't answer. So if he'd said, why should you have them? And he said, because of article this, section that, or, you know, USC this or that, or any kind of law, and he'd had some good reasoning behind it, that would have been much more interesting. A good comeback, being prepared, you know, knowing the answer to every question that you're going to ask. That's a legal tactic. He didn't have an answer. Why should you have them? And he didn't have an answer to that. Barr had some other moments that in the hearing. One of his moments is a visual one where he's being questioned and he goes to take a drink of water out of his water bottle and he stops for a second and turns and pulls a face like, you know, and then goes back to drinking the water. And someone's made a GIF out of that, which that GIF will be so useful in all of our little text messages to family members when someone's railing on about something that we are not concerned about or no longer care about. Knowing that we have to treat everyone like our neighbor, but still. So there's that. And I'm really glad that he went and then today didn't go. So you might have heard some of the drama about today where the Democrats had actually called him into the House, but they weren't going to only be the ones questioning him because he is, you know, it's part of his job to show up before congressional committees and answer their questions as the Attorney General. That has been done. In fact, you might remember Eric Holder was held in contempt of court for refusing to come in and speak to the Republicans about Fast and Furious. That happened. Notice the Democrats never talk about that. So anyway, AG Barr refused to show up this morning because it was going to look like an impeachment proceeding, because they weren't going to be the ones asking the questions. The questions were going to be asked by individual attorneys that they were going to bring in who weren't sitting members of Congress. He refused to participate in that visual farce. And I think it's right. And then they tried to make a big, kind of meme-worthy event out of it by having one of the Democrats break out a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken and eat that. And again, I say, how much political theater do we need to create here when there are so many other issues that the American people would like Congress to work on? Namely, where is the budget? Where is it? Why are the Democrats not submitting one? And I ask people who sent them to run Congress over the Republicans, why is it that we keep sending people to Congress who don't want to operate the government in the same way that we operate our homes and businesses? Why do we continue to allow that to happen? So it's pretty interesting that happened, that Bill Barr actually is more laid back and just basically he's unfazed by the entire course of events that's swirling around him. Now, the last thing I want to talk about this segment, last segment of the show until tomorrow, is California's growth. So, I've talked a few times, I've mentioned that you got a lot of population loss out of New York, California, and Illinois. And it's driven by these horrible policies, the high taxation, the single party rule. It's just people are dive bombing out of there. Well, the LA Times is now reporting that California's 2018 population growth was the slowest in state history. New demographic data now show that there are shifting immigration patterns, declining birth rates, and economic strains that make it very difficult for people to afford to live in California. Now, the Golden State actually added about 18,000 people to their population last year, which is a growth rate of 0.047. Now, anti-populist policies like welfare for illegal aliens, high taxes, and the high-speed train to nowhere, you remember that one with Gavin Newsom and all that. The middle class can't survive in these circumstances, in these conditions. California is actually kind of being converted over from a normal American state to one in which a significant portion of the population is foreign born. I always talk about a quarter of Californians being illegal aliens. Well, 27% of the population is foreign born, and up to 5 million are there illegally. And I know every single time I hear these numbers, I always wonder how accurate they are, because they're always, skewed downwards. It's kind of unbelievable. And I hate to see it, because California is a beautiful state and there are a ton of beautiful people in it who deserve some good governance and constitutionally limited government. All right, citizens, God bless you. Broadcasting from the heartland of America, I'm Stacy Washington. This has been Stacy on the Right on American Family Radio and Urban Family Talk.